All right, welcome everyone to the 2024 IMPaCT Summit. It really is great to see everyone in 3D. We spend so much time behind our computers that it's really great to spend some time in person. So as we come together today, I just want to be mindful of the deep history and culture that are intrinsic to this land, where we're going to spend some time in 3D together. So I'd like to start by sharing our land acknowledgement that was delivered by Dr. Malcolm King. On a national level, we encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous peoples on the lands in which they live, work, and visit, and become engaged allies together. We as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and their rights and responsibilities in culture, language, and the pursuit of wellness. And today, while we are coming kind of from all over Canada, I want to acknowledge that we are here today and honor those who have and continue to steward this land here. So today we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And here at IMPaCT, we're really committed to taking actionable steps to ensure that the next generation of perinatal and child health researchers are educated and informed about some of the harms of the past and how these continue to affect the inequities we see in our healthcare system and in health outcomes. And so by acknowledging the land, I hope to not only remind myself, but also everyone in this room of what you can do in your day-to-day practice as a researcher, as a clinician, as a patient partner to make your practices more inclusive, and think about whose data is not informing the care that they receive, and how making trials more accessible can actually be a meaningful step towards generating better health outcomes. And so I really wanted to take this opportunity. We're going to have some cultural teaching tomorrow morning, but this morning I just wanted to reflect a little bit and acknowledge some of the folks who have been, supporting me along kind of my journey in this space, including both Drs. Malcolm and Alexandra King, who I don't see in the room today, but I hope are arriving, and they sit on our IMPaCT steering committee. Ashley Hayward, who was unfortunately unable to make it today and has always been just a text message away when I have some questions about how we can build impact in a good way. Dr. Elder Roberta Price, who actually opened for ITSE yesterday and sits on our steering committee for some of our perinatal opioid work. And if you've ever met, I don't think I've ever met a more honorable and inspiring and generous leader in this space. And Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck and Taylor Morriso and her team that are leading some groundbreaking work in Indigenous data sovereignty and biosampling. And all of this is going to be relevant for our trials. So I really look forward to using IMPaCT as a way to uplift some of the work that's going on in this space. And so in IMPaCT, I think, I delivered a lot of land acknowledgements before I really understood what they were about. And so when I took some cultural safety training when I moved to Manitoba, I really started to understand about some of the systems that we work within and how they continue to oppress people. And so I think in IMPaCT, one of the things that we've done is make it mandatory. So all of our fellows have at least 3 hours of training that Malcolm King delivers, and provide opportunities for further education. So we also offer a 10-week program in Indigenous cultural safety training that we will cover for any of our mentors also. So if you are a mentor in this room and you want more training in this space, find Chelsea and she will get you connected. And so just know many of the folks in this room, but for those of you who haven't met me before, so my name's Lauren. I'm an associate professor in pharmacology at the University of Manitoba. I'm English and French Canadian, and I was born and raised outside Toronto, and I moved to Winnipeg in 2017. So these remind you to have the dreaded past experiences as an ICU parent, but I've also been a participant in clinical trials. So I'm a sponsor PI. I run 3 of my own trials, but my son was a participant. This is his first and last study visit with the best research nurse in the world. And so we were participants in the Moderna vaccine trial. And it's really quite humbling to look at all of the faces in this room today and somehow think why I'm the one up here, but I can't start without thanking all of the amazing people who make this meeting happen and keep IMPaCT running. And so that includes our co-director, Nancy, who is right here, and Chelsea and Zena and Linda. And I'm sure you've all interacted with these amazing humans over the past couple of days, and really we wouldn't be here without them. And thank you to our first cohort of trainees who are very patient with us as we get our content rolled out. I promise that it is coming. We just got some audio scripts this morning, so really, it is really coming, I promise. And I mean, I think I made a joke, my imposter syndrome is really at an all-time high because Peter Gill is going to be observing my steering committees for my trial. So Peter, wherever you are, just keep your expectations low. But for the rest of the room, I think we should all be really excited and have high expectations for everything that we can achieve in the next couple of days. So today, I'm just going to provide a really quick update on what we've been doing, what our mission is, introduce the fellows very briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to the rest of our speakers for the morning. So IMPaCT is a clinical trial training platform aimed to increase clinical trial capacity in perinatal and child health in Canada. And to do this, what we want is to create a common space for training and mentorship in clinical trials that will harness the existing strengths of many of the research groups in this room with sustainable and accessible infrastructure. And so IMPaCT is going to do three things. We are creating open and accessible online learning. This will be open to everyone outside of IMPaCT as well. There's no cost to access these 5 courses, which I'll share about in a moment. We offer immersive learning and one-year fellowships. So you'll meet all our fellows tomorrow, but we will have a new competition launching for next year as well. And our cross-sectoral summit. So this is where we all are today as an opportunity for professional development, expanding networks, and building on some new methods. So last year at our first IMPaCT Summit, we asked all of you what you wanted IMPaCT to do. What did you want IMPaCT to be for you? And about 46 of you filled out a survey, and I put it in ChatGPT, and I said, what are the shared goals of people with these responses? And honestly, it was really good. They did. So our goals are really to be innovative. We want to create an innovative mentorship program that includes patient partners as mentors, and that really is multidisciplinary. We want to foster mentorship and education. We want people to know where they can come if they have questions about trials or they want more training in different areas. To increase safety and trust, we have to acknowledge that the general public doesn't really trust clinical trials. That word is scary and associated with a lot of negative experiences. And so we need to acknowledge that, and we need to do things that will build trust with the public. And being collaborative and inclusive. So I think in all that we do, not only, but we really do believe that including patient partners from the beginning is going to make all of our trials better, more meaningful, and more likely to actually improve outcomes at the end of the day. So when I say IMPaCT as a community, I mean, we have more than 90 mentors. So thank all of you who have volunteered to get involved and to help mentor the next generation. We have 14 amazing parent and youth engagement experts that mentor all of our fellows, and Nancy and I on how to do this. We have 18 fellows that started in the program this year, and 6 enrichment group leaders, and those are the folks who come to us from the Enrich group. And we have more than 30 partner organizations. And so thank you to all of our partner organizations. This really, I think everyone's energy has been really inspiring to me and really validating that this was something that was really needed, was a communal space. I think someone said to me, no one wants to do the training, Lauren, you can do it for everyone. And that's great. We want IMPaCT to really be a trial support for training for all of these groups. So our team, so Nancy and I steer the ship with the support of a fantastic team. So Maureen Smith, who's one of our patient mentors who stepped up to really help us with leadership in the patient and family engagement space. Chelsea, I feel like if anyone deserves a standing ovation, it's really you, because you are the muscle that keeps us all in line. You built the ship. Linda, who I'm sure is running around trying to manage a million things, but many of you in this room know Linda, and she serves as our platform manager. Zena, who does all of our communications, and then Martin and Vivian, who stepped up to mentor our enrichment group. And so really, many of you have traveled far to be in the room with us today. So thank you so much to our youth and parent engagement specialists. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of an exciting initiative that we're launching with this group, but it really is novel to have these patient mentors and actually have our fellows get experience in engaging patients during their training. And so we asked our patient and family partners to work with us on some guiding principles that we started with the patient and family partners and fed back to the scientists about how are we going to work together in this space. And so we came up with 5 guiding principles, which are mutual respect, respecting different kinds of knowledge, seeking balanced powers, and really recognizing the importance of lived experience. Supporting ongoing learning. We have to acknowledge that no one is going to know everything at all times. And so we really want to encourage professional development in our mentors, in our trainees, but also in our parent and youth specialists. So if they want to become more involved in research, how can we support them with continuous learning? All questions are good questions. That goes for today as well. So if anyone has questions, please don't hesitate to grab a mic. And how we balance powers and respect people's time, not asking people for things that we're not actually going to action, and really committing to being efficient in how we engage. Transparent collaboration, this just, is about communicating clearly, setting expectations up front. How often are we going to meet? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? When are we going to touch base again? Oops, going backwards now. Trust and authenticity. So I think showing up as yourself, acknowledging, the things you know, the things you don't, and building these relationships with an open mind. Oops. And then finally, inclusiveness. So really making an effort to value different kinds of knowledge and different voices, different perspectives, passions, and preferences or perspectives. And so with that, I'm going to very quickly welcome our first cohort of fellows. That is because you are going to all hear from them and they will introduce themselves and their trial ideas tomorrow. So we do also have two fellows who deferred to start with us next year. So Danielle Baribo in Toronto and Taylor Morrisseau from Manitoba. And so today you're kind of like not going to do that much work, but tomorrow you're going to be doing some small group discussions and also some evaluations of the elevator pitches. So you will get to hear all of the trainees introduce themselves and their project ideas tomorrow. So I'm going to go very quickly through this. We have 5 wonderful doctoral students. And so where you see other institutions, these are partnered fellows. So some of our fellows are parts of partnership agreements with CanArt, with Where Kids Can, with One Child, Every Child. We have 4 postdoctoral fellows. So welcome to all of you. And we have 9 early career researchers that joined us in our cohort this year. We also have 6 enrichment group leads. So these are the folks who do the enrich curriculum. So the difference between this group and our fellows is that they're not working on a specific trial idea. So they are getting trial methods mentorship in general from Martin and Vivian, and they complete the enrich curriculum, not the IMPaCT curriculum. So that's the difference there. A special welcome. I think there's a tie for who traveled the furthest. So we have 2 people joining us from the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda, and we're thrilled that we're going to have hopefully 3 fellows who are going to be headed there in the fall. And so a really extra special thanks to Jennifer Clayton and Chelsea, who have planned a second week. So they're staying for 2 weeks, and next week they're doing some on-site learning at BC Children's. So a huge thank you to the team at Women's and BC Children's for putting all of these events together. There is a scanny code thing on there if you want to attend the Lunch and Learn. So BC Children's is hosting a lessons learned from their clinical trials. There is a virtual option. So if you are physically in Vancouver, you can go in person, there will be lunch. Or if you want to be in your pajamas or live somewhere else, you can join virtually. So please register for that session. And they're going to be doing a bunch of other things. So thank you for all of you who have helped make this really good partnership. We also have some folks joining us from some of our other partner organizations. So we have some folks from CanArt and Pitch and CanStat. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to give a quick update just on our curriculum, as we did add a core competency based on when we went through our education and really saw what we were delivering in all of our courses and all of the work that the fellows are going to be doing. And so we have 4 core competencies, engagement being the new one. 1, 3, and 4 haven't changed, but we wrote a 4th one on engagement, giving our trainees practical skills to facilitate involving parents, youth, and caregivers in the design and conduct and communication of clinical trials. So our IMPaCT fellows complete 5 courses. I'll show you those on the next slide. They attend our monthly webinars. They participate in discussions after the webinars close. They come to the summit. So welcome to the summit. And they participate in immersive learning. And I'll share a little bit about where our trainees are headed for their immersive learning journeys this year. They also develop a clinical trial protocol. So the IMPaCT deliverable for these fellows is a 10-page RCT protocol. So they leave with a grant at the end and sort of see their trial idea in the paper form. And so these are the 5 courses. We did, like I said, we got the audio scripts for course 1 this morning. So I promise you, I know it says June and it is June. So we know, we're getting it there, I promise. So we have 5 courses. The first one is an introduction to clinical trials, and a big shout out to N2. You guys saw Rebecca in the room somewhere for their assistance in getting us material for this first course. It has 3 modules. One is an introduction, one's on regulations and roles and trials, and one is on equity and safety considerations. Our second course was put together almost exclusively by the McMaster CanChild group and the FUR program. And this is an entire course about engaging patients and families in clinical trials. And thank you to all of you who have contributed videos and your stories to that course. It's really going to be very beautiful. So we're excited to have that course launched later in the summer. Our third course is a meaty one. They say 2 to 5 hours. That's probably the 5-hour one. And this is on design. So this goes over both traditional or conventional, I should say, trial design as well as adaptive trial design, and talks about different design features, trial operating characteristics, and how to make sure that you're asking the right question. The 4th course is on clinical trials operations. And this is really the nitty-gritty of the management, the day-to-day troubleshooting, being compliant, how to prepare for an audit, all that good fun stuff. And then the last one is on communication. So how do we communicate with the public about trials, not only sharing our trial results back to participants, but how do we let people know what clinical trials are and where to find them and why they should be a part of them? So all of our courses will be on RISE, which is the Raising Interdisciplinary Science Excellence, I think. I'm looking at, yes, okay. And so it's myrise.lms or my.riselms.ca. This is the platform that's used by, I want to say about 10 other health research training platforms. So you can create an account on there and you can access a whole bunch of training, not just in trials, but in other places too. So I really suggest that if you haven't made an account yet, check out what's on there. But this is what the IMPaCT learning pathway looks like. So you can see they do their TCPS core training. They do their 3 hours of Indigenous research ethics, and they do the Porch modules as an introduction to engagement. So part of our curriculum is immersive learning, and this is where our fellows are going this year. So we have 13 fellows that will be joining the CanStat annual meeting for some more training in biostatistics, and we think this is going to be a great opportunity for statisticians and non-statisticians to meet each other and recognize the value that each of you bring to the team. Fellows that will be doing the Families Engagement and Research course, so that's a practical course run through the CanChild group, and 6 that will be doing the SANYAS anti-racism and Indigenous cultural safety training. That's the 10-week program I mentioned earlier. We have 4 trainees that are doing some knowledge translation training, and then 3 that are going to be going to UGHE for global health and trials, immersive learning, and 3 that will be going to Sick Kids for the Child Health Policy Accelerator with Dr. Moore Hepburn, who I think I saw somewhere, but if you want to give a wave, go for it in the corner back there. And then we have also, so again, Peter is going to join my steering committee. Good luck to you, Peter. And we have a fellow who's going to be joining the PCON and looking at clinical trial execution. We have one fellow who's going to go to Germany for the Society for Reproductive and Infant Psychology meeting, one who's going to come to Winnipeg for the International Meeting on Indigenous Child Health, and one who's going to take a Bayesian Adaptive Trials course out of Hopkins. So these were broad experiences, and they were able to also suggest their own experiences that they felt would complement kind of where they are and where they want to go. So our webinars have been really well attended. So thank you all who have been sharing these webinars. So we had one on the basics of youth and parent and caregiver engagement. And we had one that Beth Potter and Pranish did on clinical trials and rare diseases and the role of patient registries. And so we had 83 people for the first webinar and 128 for the second webinar, which is fantastic. We have some great speakers. Dr. Tamara Lewis is going to give the next one on racial and ethnic diversity in pediatric trials, current barriers, and a path towards inclusive trial design and conduct. So these webinars are open to anyone. So you just need to register. You can share the link with whoever you like. And so please do share them within your network, and you can find them on our website on the events tab. So I'm just going to talk quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alicia for our first talk for today. So first up, we're going to hear from Health Canada. We're going to get an update on the Pediatric Drug Action Plan. Then we'll take a couple of questions, and then we're going to start our first session. So our first session is on designing for dyads. And so this is really a session around designing clinical trials that reflect the needs of both pregnant people and the babies and their children. And then we're going to have a series of short talks. So these are kind of more rapid fire talks, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So there might be time for one question in between speakers, depending on how they stick to their time. And I will be up here. So if you see me get up, it is your time to be done. But we have a panel. So we have a 45-minute panel. If you have questions, there's notepads on the paper. Please jot down some notes, because we'll have 45 minutes to have questions with the whole panel up here. And so Fabiana, thank you for agreeing. Lost where everyone is sitting, but wherever Fabiana is, thank you for agreeing to moderate that panel. So we'll call you back when that's time. Feel free to drop in. Tomorrow, so we are back in the same room tomorrow, and tomorrow we have 3 sessions. So we have our session on patient and youth engagement in trials, and this is going to be a really excellent session, and I hope and then we're going to do some small group work around, where are we actually going with some of these challenges that they bring up, and how can we make our trials better. We're going to have our elevator pitches. So that's where each trainee is going to get 3 minutes to tell you about themselves and what they're up to and what they're doing and why their idea is important and why they're passionate about doing this research. And the enrichment group, for those of you who are here, will go to the Junior Ballroom D, which is also on the 3rd floor. Everyone else will just be in here. We're going to start. We have a very busy day both days, so we will start it right again at 9 a.m. sharp. But there is an opening ceremony tomorrow at 7, and then breakfast from 8 to 9. And then we have in the afternoon, we have our session on building teams and designing trials that respond to diverse populations. So we'll have a talk from Alison Orth and Minaza Jamil on addressing newcomer needs in clinical trials and some of the barriers for those who are newcomers to Canada. And then we're going to have a panel with some different trialists and learn about what they do, or different trial team members, I should say, and learn a little bit more about what a knowledge broker does, what a monitor does, what does a statistician do, and what a trial manager and a knowledge broker, trial manager, statistician, and monitor. So if you have any questions about what those roles are like or what they do or how to find one, save them for tomorrow. And then tomorrow there's a poster session. So I know lots of folks might have posters to present for some of the other research groups. We don't have an IMPaCT specific poster session. So this is the main poster session and it is in the North Tower upstairs, Pavilion Ballroom. Upstairs. Okay. And then there's a keynote dinner. So Bernard is giving the keynote dinner tomorrow. So I'm sure it will be excellent and trial relevant. And so there will be a dinner from 6 to 9 that has a keynote. So I thought just for my last couple of minutes, I'd talk about what we're doing this year, like what's coming next for us. So yes, the courses will launch. We're going to review the RISE registration process because some of the questions in there don't necessarily reflect sort of what we would like to see in the registration process. But again, it's a collaborative. So we work with quite a few other training platforms on that. Our sustainability plan. So we spent all day yesterday talking sustainability with ITSE. So thank you for the inspiration, but we need to do some hard thinking about how are we going to test. I'm looking at Samir because I know you're also having these discussions for CanStat. And so, what is a program size that we could reasonably maintain. And so we'll have some discussions with our oversight committee and then we'll share that back to everyone at our mentor meeting in the fall. So our evaluation plan, so Maureen has really inspired us to lead a formal evaluation of engaging our patient mentors in a training platform. And so that's a really innovative component. And I think will hopefully help inform how we do it better, but also inform and encourage other training platforms to involve patient and family mentors. And Leslie Pritchard, who I think is also here, we're going to work with the other health research training platforms on how do we evaluate training overall? Like what is a training platform? What is a good training platform? What should we be measuring? And so we're partnering with Enrich and some of the other health research training platforms for that evaluation. For any of we are looking for like 3 to 5 mentors to be involved with the patient engagement evaluation, and the usual honorarium applies for the parent and youth mentors. And there will be a publication for any of the academic folks who are inspired and want to sort of build some literature in the space around parent and partner mentorship in training programs. So all of our applications, and so our selection committee process prioritizes trials that are responding to needs of underrepresented groups. That will continue for the fall competition. We will continue to allocate at least 2 training awards for Black and Indigenous applicants. And this year we're going to have some priority areas. So this aligns with some of our partners. That means we can train more people. So these partners pay half of the salary awards, and that means we can offer more awards. So we'll have some in women's and girls health, partnered with GROW, and neurodevelopment, partnered with CanArt, in rare disease, partnered with Rare Kids Can, and in pandemic preparedness. So we're really focusing, while we have the resources to really focus on team building and problem solving and complex trial design in a less chaotic environment. So we'll share information as that becomes available. And we'll continue to partner with the Pediatric Child Health Research Meeting. I mean, I'm sure I will be at the Enrich meeting anyways, as will many of you. But we really felt that next year we want to focus specifically on really building relationships. And so we'll continue to offer all of our workshops and respond to the needs of the training community. So if you have training needs, please let us know, and we can hopefully track down an expert or bring in someone internationally. We'll continue to offer letters of support and matching funds for training. So if you are writing a grant, let us know and we can help support you. And our new cohort will start August 1st. So we are going to have an open call August 1st for our next fellows. And with that, those are all of my updates. I am going to welcome an update from Health Canada on the pediatric drug plan. So Dr. Alicia Croker is the director of the Centre for Policy Pediatrics and International Collaboration in the Health, Products and Food branch of Health Canada. And in this position, Dr. Croker is responsible for developing ways to increase access to safe and effective health products for pediatric populations in Canada, among probably far too many other things in your file. So thank you, Alicia, and we look forward to your update.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I am very, very excited to be here. I tried to make it last year, but unfortunately that didn't work out. And so very excited to be here today to meet all of you and to learn from all of you. Thank you. I think over the next little while, I'm really looking forward to that. So I have 20 minutes and I will do my very best to stick to that, even though this is a topic that I could speak about forever. So if you do have any questions or want to talk more afterwards, just please feel free to come and find me. I am a public servant, so my life is boring and I have nothing to disclose. So it was back in 2020, the end of 2020, when Health Canada officially launched its Pediatric Drug Action Plan. This was after a lot of discussions and consultations with pediatric health experts, with patients, with families. But we were able to talk to a great number of people to really try to understand what the issues are. Within this group, I likely don't need to go over all of the issues, but the final result, of course, is that children in Canada don't have access to the medicines that they need. And if they are, they're often not in appropriate formulations. And so what we wanted to do with our Pediatric Drug Action Plan, or our PDAP, is to develop and implement mechanisms so that infants, children, and youth in Canada have access to the medications that they need in age-appropriate formulations. This, of course, is not something that Health Canada can do by itself. We need to work with a whole bunch of people, including all of you, in order to really accomplish these 3 goals that we have listed here. So first, we're looking to find ways to increase the development of essential medicines and formulations. Second, to improve access to pediatric medicines and formulations. So of course, we know that there are more pediatric medicines that are available in other jurisdictions, like in Europe or the US, for example. And so that second goal is really to improve access in Canada to those medications. And then our third goal is more of a transparency angle, so providing more information on this topic to people in Canada. So the full PDAP is quite extensive, and so we've had to prioritize a little bit on what we will focus on first. And so we've picked 3 things that we think will have the biggest return on investment, at least initially. And so first, I was going to say we were looking to, but we actually have implemented a pediatric pilot that essentially will help us test out what a pediatric regulation could look like in Canada. So that's something that the US has done, that Europe has done, and some other jurisdictions as well. And we'll talk about what the pieces of that are, but it's essentially a requirement for industry to test products in children that are expected to be used in children. So these are adult medications that they bring to the market. If it's likely that those medicines will be used in pediatric populations, they're required to conduct trials in children as well, and then submit that data to the regulator so that there can be a pediatric indication. The next piece is developing a national priority list. And so this is to help us first identify what drugs are urgently needed in Canada, and then trying to figure out a way to bring those products to Canada. And then the third one is looking for ways that we can facilitate access to certain pediatric drugs. So that's mostly working with industry to figure out what ways, whether it's a regulation, whether it's some sort of incentive, whether it's some sort of regulatory flexibility, what's needed for industry to bring these products to Canada, especially if they're already in market or on market somewhere else. So first, looking at the pediatric regulation. And so, like I said, there are jurisdictions that already have pediatric regulations or legislations, most notably the US and Europe as well. And the main purpose of these is to increase the availability of medicines for pediatric populations in those jurisdictions. And I think at Health Canada, we thought back in, I think it was 2007 that they came into effect. We thought that if Health Canada, we could implement an incentive to bring those products to Canada. If the testing was already being done in other jurisdictions, that it would be very easy to incentivize that data to be submitted to Health Canada. Over the years, we found that that is not the case. And so we are looking at what a regulation could potentially look like in Canada. So in terms of what these requirements look like in other jurisdictions is essentially what I said. So sponsors, those are industry, they are asked to submit their pediatric studies at the time of the adult submission. That almost never happens. And so because they do the adult studies first and then they do the pediatric studies. And so as sort of a a hold or a promise to conduct those studies. When the adult studies are submitted, sponsors will submit a pediatric plan. And the plan will outline all the studies that they will be doing. And so that's sort of the hold for the study to come in. And then once those trials are done, industry is required to submit that data to the regulator, and then it will go through the regular process. So what we did, and we've launched that now in at the end of February, is we have, in advance of considering regulations or legislation, and so this is in policy, we are asking industry to essentially do the same things. So when they come in with their adult submission, if they have an approved pediatric plan from Europe or from the US, we're asking them to submit it with their package. And then to submit the data later on once they have the studies done. And so this is really to try to get pediatric data to come to Canada so that we can get more information on safety, efficacy, dosage, et cetera, of drugs in the pediatric population, to help bring Health Canada into alignment with other jurisdictions that do have these requirements. But I think most importantly, at least for us right now, is to inform future policy and regulatory initiatives, to see what we can do and if it makes sense for Canada as a jurisdiction to have these kinds of requirements as well. So for now, participation in the pilot is voluntary, and all sponsors with in-scope submissions, we're asking them to participate. If they don't, we are asking them why not, and they will be asked to complete a short survey just to give us a bit more information about their submission when it comes in. Moving now into the national priority list of pediatric drugs. So like I said, the main goal of this is to first identify which drugs are urgently needed in Canada, because we do hear that a lot. But when we went to look for what drugs are missing, what are needed most urgently, what, that kind of information, it wasn't available. And so the first big goal of this initiative was to identify what the gaps are, what's urgently needed in Canada. So the specific goals were to sort of look at what's needed in Canada and then highlight this to stakeholders, including both industry, who will need to submit those drugs to Canada, and the provinces and territories for reimbursement related purposes, but to really highlight the drugs that are urgently needed in Canada. And then to help us, depending on what the list is, what the drugs look like, help us develop regulatory mechanisms that we can use to support industry in bringing those products to Canada. So we've been working with a really, really excellent pediatric external reference group. PERG is not an ideal acronym, but it is the acronym for this group, which is co-chaired by Dr. Charlotte Moore-Hepburn, who is sitting right over there, along with Dr. Catherine L'Italienne from Montreal. And so we've been working with this group to help us figure out what of the drugs that we've received. And I think on the next slide, I have how exactly we've done that, how we are getting to our final list. So we do have specific inclusion criteria, and so it's on here. It has to address a disease or disease area or condition with a high unmet need. Of course, it has to lack approval for sale in Canada, or a pediatric indication in Canada, or a child-friendly formulation, and it does have to be approved for sale in a trusted foreign jurisdiction. And this was sort of to get us to a manageable list of products. So the nomination process, it's been a very, very interesting project. Yeah, no, interesting is the perfect word. It's been sort of really, really eye-opening. We and the co-chairs had multiple webinars trying to get the word out of what it was that we were doing, so that we could raise awareness and explain what we were doing, because what we really needed from pediatric medical experts was the expertise in telling us what was missing, what the gaps were. And I think at the beginning, we were a little bit nervous that we wouldn't get any nominations. So we wanted to sort of get the word out about that. We did hold a 60-day nomination. And I think we were all quite surprised with the number of nominations that we got back. So there's 905 nominations that came through, which I think just underscores the very deep need for pediatric products in Canada. We did go through all 905 submissions. There were 119 drugs that we were able to screen in based on the criteria. And then those products went to the PIRG, who developed a really excellent way to analyze the drugs and prioritize the drugs. And I think we now finally have a short list of drugs that have come back to us that we get to work with and consult on soon. So we're really, really excited about the next steps of that. And so we are looking to launch a consultation. And so that'll be a broad consultation. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to see that as well. We also will be focusing our consultations with industry as well, and with provinces and territories too, because we'll need both sides to help us bring those products to Canada and then make them accessible to people in Canada. And then over the fall, we will analyze the feedback from those consultations and hopefully by the beginning of next year, publish that list so that we can start bringing those products to Canada. The idea would be that the list would be evergreen. And so as some products come off, we'll be able to add additional products on and sort of keep that cycle and that system going. So those are our major updates. Like I said, really happy to answer any questions that you may have. And if you want to talk more, just come and find me. Happy to discuss further.
So from an impact perspective, if we have this list of priority medicines, is there a way that we can help fill some of the evidence gaps? Or what is your vision for how we can help support bringing some more data on these essential medicines?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think one thing, and I didn't say this in the presentation, but one thing that I love about working with the pediatric community is how good you are at pulling yourselves together and speaking with one voice, which very rarely happens with any of the stakeholders that we work with. So it's been really, really wonderful to be able to sort of collect information that way and to be able to work with you on, you know, this nomination process and on hearing and understanding what the issues are so that we can focus our solutions on sort of the root of all of these problems. In terms of what can be done, I think that there might be a couple different pieces. So first is advocacy, which you also do very well. So a lot of the letters that you send, they eventually make their way to me, but it does raise awareness at the various levels, wherever you send it to, the minister, the deputy, or the assistant deputy minister. It does raise awareness, and that does go a long way in helping to support pushing these ideas through and making sure that pediatrics stays on the radar, because I think that is absolutely critical. And it's how I got pediatrics in my title. That was one of the recommendations actually from pediatric experts, that we have a group that has pediatrics in its name so that it helps everyone remember. So that was excellent. Also, I'm wondering, and this is obviously me just sort of brainstorming here, but I'm wondering if there's something that we can do maybe through CIHR as well, if there are outstanding issues or, data that we need for really old drugs, for example, where it's maybe not overly likely that the sponsor is going to want to come or do additional studies, or if there's gaps in knowledge. I feel like this group might be a perfect group to sort of fill in some of those gaps. And so that's something that we can consider and sort of highlight what they are based on the drugs that we have on our list.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to worry about us continuing our advocacy for this room. They're a pretty inspired group.
Yeah.
Any questions for Alicia? We have time for a question or two. Otherwise, Maureen.
It's great to see all that work. Are you partnering or collaborating with Canada's rare disease drug strategy in your work?
Yeah, that is a great question. So there is, a different branch within Health Canada that leads on the National Strategy on Drugs for Rare Diseases, also the National Pharmacare Strategy. We do work very, very closely with both of those groups and are trying to help as they are providing policy advice on how to spend the money that they have to make sure that there's a big pediatrics focus on those responses as well. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious in the pilot, and this may be too far down the line, whether you have plans to kind of do follow-up in 5-10 years, because there's data from PRIA in the US that shows that 10 years out, only 40% of the mandated pediatric clinical trials are actually completed. I know it's just a small kind of pilot, but I think that might be a really important piece to consider because PRIA has not really delivered very well so far.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all very complicated. We do talk extensively with the FDA and with the EMA as well. So the EMA is the European Medicines Agency about the success of their pediatric regulations. We've had lots of discussions with them about, would you have any advice for us? Anything that you implemented that you suggest we shouldn't, those kinds of discussions. Where it gets tricky is where there's lots of overlap for competing patients, probably especially in the oncology space, right? If you have 10 or more different trials that are, recruiting for AML, for example, or something like that, it gets tricky to recruit the patients. And that's why after 10 years, sometimes there's that gap. There are industry does go back to the regulator to say, listen, this is the situation we're in. We're having trouble recruiting these patients. We actually think that this drug, whether it's their drugs or a different sponsor's drug, might actually be a better fit. And so maybe we can focus, our recruiting or the recruiting of, those patients for this drug instead. So there is some of that does happen. The FDA and Europe, they do a follow-up because they have this plan that's sort of the placeholder for the pediatric data. And they have timelines. And if they don't meet their timelines, then they have to go back to the sponsor to negotiate new timelines or what the best course of action would be. So yes, definitely. If we were to implement anything, or even with this pilot, that is something that we'd have to take into consideration for sure. Yeah, good point.
One more tiny question. Given that the theme of today is about designing for dyads, maybe you can speak to if you're aware of any incentives or pathways for supporting evidence submission for pregnancy and those who are pregnant in drug submissions. And if you don't know, feel free to say you don't know, but if there is anything going on around encouraging trials with pregnant folks, I think that we would love an update on that too, if you have one.
Absolutely. So I think it's probably public knowledge. So
Looking at me like I know, I don't know.
pretty sure it is. So we work very closely with the ICH, the International Council for Harmonization of Pharmaceutical Products, a couple of other words there, but the International Council of Harmonization is the big one. And so that's a place where a bunch of regulators get together from across the country and industry gets together, and we develop globally harmonized guidance on particular issues. And sometimes they're very, very particular, and sometimes they're a bit more broad. So patient involvement, for example, would be an example of more of a broad guidance, or, yeah, exactly. Which is very, very, yeah, exactly. Like Q12, for example, is very, very specific. But there is work that has started through ICH on a guidance for the inclusion of pregnant people in clinical trials, which would be globally harmonized guidance. And I think help us get over the hurdle of, no, we need to protect that population from trials, which they did the same for children, which gets us into the situation where we just don't have products tested in those populations. And so I think that'll go a long way to help supporting more trials in that space.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And feel free if you have other questions to find Alicia. And she likes letters. You heard it here first. So if you want to send her letters, she will still come to our meeting. All right. And with that, we're going to fit 2 more rapid fire talks in before break. So buckle up. They're going to be short, but there will be coffee, I promise. So our first session is on designing for dyads. We're focusing all on building trials that are more equitable and meaningful, and really include thinking about both the person that is pregnant and the effects that it might have on the fetus and eventually the child. And so the goals of this session are really to highlight some of the importance of having patient partnership in perinatal trials, and some of the advantages and some of the reasons why we should all be doing this. We'll talk specifically about trials with pregnant people and trials with neonates, and what are some of the specific considerations. What do we need to think about differently when we're doing trials with these populations? And we'll talk about developing some strategies for designing meaningful trials in the perinatal period. So I'm going to quickly introduce all of our speakers for this panel, as well as our wonderful moderator, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lori and Nawe for the first talk. So first, we're going to hear from Lori, as she has lived with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis since she was 14 years old, and this disease has impacted all aspects of her school, work, pregnancy, and parenting. Her lived experience has led to her involvement with the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, a grassroots patient-driven and managed organization. And Nawe Moss, going to come up and speak with Lori, is a dedicated advocate for women's health and a friend I met on Twitter and invited to travel across the world. So thank you. Her collaborations with patients and clinicians and researchers and organizations have been really pivotal at a global stage in ensuring that patient perspectives help shape the research agenda. Then we're going to hear from our obstetric colleagues. So we're going to hear from Dr. Natalie Diane, who's an assistant professor of medicine at McGill University and an attending physician at McGill University Health Center. We're going to hear from Dr. Isabelle Malhamé, who's a clinician scientist and assistant professor in the Department of Medicine as well at McGill University Health Center, and she specializes in obstetric medicine. We're going to hear, I think I skipped your bio, Shivik, but we're going to hear from Shivik Mitra, who is a neonatologist here in BC. Sorry, I'm going to blame the script for that, but feel free to add anything else to your introduction. And we're going to hear from Dr. Carl Halakard, who's a distinguished professor and neonatologist who's joining us from Belgium today. So I'm going to make sure my job is going to be to keep them on time. So if I stand up behind you, please wrap up. Chelsea will hold a sign that says you have 2 minutes. So we got lots to do. So then I'm going to turn it over to Fabiana. So Fabiana is going to moderate a panel. So please, if you do have questions, keep some notes. You will have time to ask them. It will be after the break. And so with that, I'm going to invite up Lori and Nawe to take it away.
Well, I will, yes, I am a little shorter. I will start things off and then I'll pass it over to Nawe for the last 10 minutes. Rapid fire will be. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself now or.
Yeah, hello, I'm Nawe. So yeah, I'm also kind of like a patient voice person. I've come from the UK today. So I feel very honored to be here with you and with Lori today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, it's really nice to actually meet people like Lauren and Nawe because, you know, I've been trying like Nawe, but on the other side of the pond to kind of bring greater awareness of the experiences of pregnant people with chronic illnesses and disabilities for quite some time. So it's quite encouraging to actually be amongst all of you because I think you all sort of care to the same level as well. So in terms of a little bit about who I am. I mean, I have to mention CAPA or my role with CAPA because most of the work that I've done in this space has been sort of under the banner of that organization. And I'll give like a super brief description of the organization. You're more than free to sort of tweet about this on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, as well as the CAPA account. So anyways, here are my disclosures for the presentation. So a little bit about CAPA. I mean, I sort of came across the organization in the mid-2000s, sort of amidst the withdrawal of an arthritis medication. And that's kind of how I became involved in this world. We kind of cover those 3 main points in terms of offering education and support. And I'm going to do a plug. I'm here and I've been pleased to work with Dr. Mary Davir and her team as we're offering 2 Café Scientifiques. One is happening this coming Sunday. If you are more than welcome to register and get involved and just hear from, you know, parents as well as researchers, including one that's involved with Indigenous communities and involved with IMPaCT, Ashley Hayward. So, but really here today, I'm bringing my perspective as someone that's lived with a chronic illness, a pediatric illness, sort of veering onto the rare disease space, diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis in 1991, back when therapeutics were definitely not what they are today for arthritis. So I've kind of experienced the before and after. And so I've really relied on prescription medications for much of my life, right? At 14, you know, I haven't really, I've actually taken therapeutics and medications more than I haven't. So it came as a real surprise to me as I, you know, got older and was contemplating pregnancy and becoming a parent that I found out in this pre-pregnancy counseling that all of the medications pretty much that I was taking had not been like properly studied in pregnancy. I was just like, how is this possible? I was genuinely surprised, right? Despite, you know, living with the condition at that point for close to 15 years. So yeah, it was a hard reality to sort of face that, those medications I couldn't take. And so I was often faced with like, well, what am I going to do? There's such a scarcity of evidence. And me and my husband had to make these very difficult choices around what to take and not to take. So much so that even, I just heard that, I would likely also possibly get worse. I might possibly get better as well during pregnancy. So there was a lot of uncertainty, and found out that I was more likely to flare sort of in the afterbirth. And so found out as well that I'd have to go back on those medications very, very quickly, right? If I wanted to be the parent that I wanted to be, or else I was basically faced with, living in pain and losing a great deal of my function. So it actually inspired me during that time to participate. Mother Risk was still going, a entity at the time. And so I gave a sample of my breast milk, to the organization to study. I never knew exactly what the results were at the end of the day, but I guess I just felt strongly about building that evidence base, so that other parents or, parents to be would have a bit more data in order to make these very difficult choices around treatments. My son was born. That's my little Charlie there, my silly Charlie. And pretty much that picture reflects who he is today. He's a very happy and silly boy. Things didn't go as well for my second pregnancy. I seemed to be able to manage, though always sort of managing off the pain that I might experience and my symptoms. But things, and signs very early on were that this pregnancy was not at all going to be like the previous one. And so I ended up, having to go off my medications yet again because, faced with very little evidence around their use in pregnancy. And I'll be honest, that same medication I'm taking today, and I still don't really know whether it's safe to take during pregnancy. And so Charlie's 11 years old, right? So anyways, things weren't going well. I ended up having to go on increasing amount of steroids, like massive steroids, I have to say, by the end of by the time I entered my third trimester. And so I was admitted to hospital, I think 3 times. They couldn't quite figure out what was wrong because, of course, I was always taking medications to manage my condition, and these funny symptoms started coming out that no one could sort of put their finger on. And so it sort of culminated in the week before he was born, where I was getting increasingly more difficult to breathe. And the next thing I sort of had a crisis. I had a seizure, and that was my last memory, right? And then I woke up in the intensive care unit. Luckily, Charlie was okay. He was in the NICU, but found out he wasn't breathing when he was born. So that's hard, right? Just living through all this. So it's why I guess I feel so passionate about the topic and, why I'm here today. So I guess going back to some of my major challenges is it's really quite hard to make these decisions when it's for 2 people. Like I said, I was often managing the risk of the pain against the symptoms that I had. It was just a lot of uncoordinated care as well, and healthcare wasn't super accessible to us. And I'd like to highlight a recent report that I was also involved in recently, looking at equity, inclusion, and pregnancy care, which basically found, very similar issues, not just my own personal experience, but across a lot of people becoming pregnant in the province of Ontario. So, often I'd kind of go see my maternal fetal medicine specialist and I'd ask about my rheumatoid arthritis, for example, and they refer me to my rheumatologist, and then I'd ask my rheumatologist about the pregnancy and they'd refer me back. So just to give you like a very practical example as to how you have to manage care amongst all that. And also having to access allied healthcare professionals sort of on my own. Again, another healthcare provider to kind of get through and manage. So I guess all that being said, it sort of led me to work on developing some resources for pregnant people living with arthritis. These resources are available. And, I guess it's been really awesome to kind of meet, like, again, all these different people. I discovered and met another advocate based in the US called Mariah Leach. She'll be speaking at our parenting webinar on Saturday. So, encourage you to come see her. And she founded this group called Mamas Facing Forward. And it's a very positive Facebook community of, many parents that live with chronic illness and the different issues that they face. So we co-developed sort of the next version of these resources so they could be shared and used more broadly. I also launched, co-led anyways, the Bearing It All project, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And you can, again, go to that website to learn a little bit more about the project. So this was a collaboration amongst, I don't know if you can see the image, but, there's the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, Canadian Spondylitis Association, Canadian Psoriasis Network, and Canadian Association of Psoriasis Patients. So we surveyed basically over 400 people that live with psoriatic, rheumatic, and inflammatory diseases. And so we had a very broad focus looking at sexual and reproductive health needs. We often kind of just focus on the pregnancy, for example, without understanding the obvious prerequisite to that. So, and we really just wanted to become more inclusive and kind of target a broader set of topics. So they basically identified that their health is impacted across all these different domains, right? Family planning, pregnancy, mental health, and perimenopause and menopause. And you can go to our website to learn a bit more. But again, like I was mentioning before, with finding other people as well. And, we found that, nearly 1 in 10 were actually trying to prevent pregnancy, but less than half had really had any, substantial conversations with their healthcare providers about the impact of their medications on their ability to conceive, right? So this is really big news, right? Like, these are people that rely on medications like I did to manage their health, right? And I might also add that there are some clear teratogenic medications, right, for people, like I take one now, for example, now that I'm beyond having children, at this point with my 11-year-old. So, things like methotrexate and leflunomide, right, that have, very specific indications and use during pregnancy. So yeah, this is very bothersome from that perspective, as well as just some medications like those used for pain, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, right, which are not supposed to be taken in the 3rd trimester, right, or else they can cause issues with the developing fetus or the baby. So yeah, this is pretty worrisome that this isn't happening sort of more broadly. And here are just some quotes in terms of what some of the people who took our survey said, right? That some had, found out that they may have miscarried due to taking one of the medications, and one of those non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, for example, that they were told not to have children, right, by their healthcare providers. And because of their condition, or perhaps because of the medications they take, or just being, concerned about being a parent and feeling like they didn't have the resources to support, being the parents that they wanted to be. And so another sort of key finding of that survey was that, they actually hadn't talked to their providers about their medications until they were pregnant, right? So, and we know, right, that so many pregnancies are unplanned, right? This should not really be a surprise, right? Like, having children and these babies are, but there's a strong desire for information, right? I don't know, hopefully you can see the detail there, but the highest information need was around medications and how safe they are to use during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, right? And just advice on how to manage the impact of pain and how to manage the impact of fatigue on, during pregnancy as well as in the parenting period, and just advice on trying to be the parents that they wish to have. So all that being said, and looking ahead, I mean, I think Norway is going to do like a super amazing job and sharing sort of more broadly some of the solutions here that need to happen. But I'd really like to see, I mean, I'm involved as a patient partner in research. And so I always ask, are pregnant people included, right? And it's always like, no, they're not actually. And we're just going to exclude them and make sure we clarify that in the protocol, right? I was like, that kind of wasn't what I was going for, but I like to see, that we actively include that community, right? That because there are real world impacts to not having that information. That if, people are deciding to keep taking these medications, we should be tracking every single one of them, right? Like, why do we not know? And that we also, it's like you make a lot of hard choices, right? At least like follow them. And also just to have person-centered multidisciplinary counseling. And of course, to involve patients and people with lived experience in developing all the solutions. And just a few upcoming events. Like I said, that parenting webinar on the right, if you want to scan the QR code, but also because of some of this other work I've been doing in the province of Ontario, we're holding a webinar with ICES on June 18th, where you'll get to hear from me, the researchers, and other people that live with disabilities that have been pregnant or are parents, as well as I think the ADM of accessibility in the province of Ontario. So, we're trying to do our best, I guess, to raise awareness of some of these issues and to get some change. So with that, I will pass it over to Nala.
Hi, hello. Yeah, that was so moving. Seriously, so moving. I don't have a disclosure slide, but I just, before I start, I'll just say I do some work on patient public involvement for the University of Birmingham and Queen Mary University of London. And I have a tiny little charity. And a lot of the work that I'm going to talk to you today about the Brid Commission, I actually do unpaid, just because, like Laurie, it means so much to us. So I also have a chronic condition, and I was very lucky because I also had preconception counseling before I got pregnant with my first child. And I was incredibly lucky because there was a trial going on, a randomized control trial, and I decided to take part. For me, it was more or less that I wanted more care, closer care, which is one of the reasons why I took part in the trial. And then when I had my second child, so I learned a lot through that because it meant that I learned more about my condition, more about pregnancy and managing my condition in pregnancy. And when I went to have my second child, that meant that I knew a bit more about this. And I had my baby in a different hospital, in a smaller hospital with different level of care. And it made me really angry because my care was not great. And it's only because I'd had my first baby through this trial that I actually knew what I should be expecting and the things that I should be looking out for much more than my healthcare provider. So I think that's one of the reasons as well why I've been advocating. And similar to Laurie, this is actually a really stressful, anxious time for you. Like it really, really is. And just to kind of reiterate what Laurie said is that, we have to live with the decisions that we take during pregnancy about our medication, for the rest of our lives. This isn't just, we can go home at the end of the day. This is years and years. So my child had a congenital anomaly and, he's fine. It's all fine. But, it's been lots of years of going in and out. He's had a relapse and he had an operation earlier this year. And this is, again, 11 years old, So those kind of consequences last a long time. And you carry that guilt. A lot of the time you do carry that guilt. So one thing that's sort of obvious, probably to many of you, is that these problems aren't just, for Laurie or I in one country or another country. These problems and issues and anxieties span across the world. There's millions and millions of women having babies, or wanting to have babies that are facing those same challenges. Should I be taking my medication? Can I get pregnant? Should I be breastfeeding? So the burden is really compounded as well is if you have more than one condition. So there's many women who have multiple health conditions as well. And This commission, the Bridge Commission, it's one of many initiatives globally, but we came together. It's a group, a multidisciplinary group of sort of experts in pregnancy and breastfeeding. They include researchers, health professionals, former regulators, patients and advocates. And we all do this voluntarily, and we are all over the world. So we represent different health systems in different countries. And we all have a common goal, really, which is around elevating women to be guardians of their own health alongside their health professionals, and making sure that women have and families have access to reliable, high quality data to help them understand the benefits as well as the risks of disease management. So there's lots of stats here. I'm going to refer you to a report shortly, but I just wanted to reiterate, there's no easy answers. These anxieties and these questions that we have, it's difficult. And we're often left to do this with little or no data and very little understanding about the benefits and risks of stopping medication or continuing. So we just recently published this report. So I have it over here. So it literally came out a couple of weeks ago that the Commission's been working on. And in essence, we tried to think about some of the practical action-oriented solutions. So yesterday I was in one of these meetings and Christine was saying about, you have to think big, but actually you often have to start small. So some of these things are just small things that we can take away with us. And we realized that, it's an ecosystem. There's lots of different stakeholders. And we wanted to make sure that we had options and recommendations for different stakeholders within this. So we split the report. There's a couple of sections. So one is around data generation and making sure that women have opportunities to take part in research during pregnancy and breastfeeding, because at the moment there's a gap, and that gap, it makes it really difficult to weigh up the risks of continuing or stopping medication and enabling us to make decisions. And not just us, but even our healthcare providers, because even if we look to our healthcare providers, as much as they try, they don't know because the data is not out there. The information, the evidence isn't out there. So there's lots of recommendations. I know it's a bit small and you can have a look. I've got some copies of the report, or you can scan at the top on the QR code. But one of the items is around including women, pregnant women and breastfeeding women in clinical research. This should be standard practice, At the moment, often they're either excluded, or if women become pregnant during a trial, their data is excluded. So we really need to make sure that this is the default position. And if we are excluding women, then what is the rationale for excluding them? We need to invest in long-term data collection. I think Alicia mentioned around this earlier on. A lot of our anxieties are around the impact for our children. So being able to have a longer term evidence base is really important. We're also thinking about underserved populations and how we proactively include them in clinical trials as well, and that the research is representative. And research dissemination. So this is a bit of a pet hate of mine, because often I used to assess funding applications in the UK for the big funder, and often all our funding applications, everyone is focused on doing the research, which is great, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to share your findings so that this actually filters down into how care happens for patients. So we put something in there around dissemination and making sure that that's integral. Thinking about, not like you guys are working on clinical studies during pregnancy and for pediatric studies, but actually there's lots of studies going on for chronic diseases, and those studies should include pregnant women, and regardless of what time they are through their pregnancy. And thinking about different trimesters, when we're doing clinical trials, we need to capture that information at the different trimester point. I think you mentioned about some medications, it changes during the point of pregnancy, so that's a really important item we wanted to flag. Other things, just more general, from a healthcare provider perspective, we need to make sure that there's opportunities for women to take part in studies. And we need to make sure that our health professionals are aware that the studies are happening, because if they're not aware, they can't, put them forward for women to take part, and women will not have the opportunity to say, yeah, I do want to take part in that study or not. And also health professionals need to make space and time to have open discussions discussions, because often, you are reluctant to take part in a study. It can be quite a big, daunting thing. And during this report, I mean, I've spoken to many women, a bit like Laurie, but during this report, we also spoke to 13 women in lots of different countries. We had a lady in Canada, but everything from Indonesia, Italy, Peru, and they had different chronic diseases. Some had multiples, and they came, they often said very similar things, and we tried to integrate their voices into the report. But one thing that I thought was really important is that everyone has different comfort levels. So not everyone is going to be happy to take part in a clinical study, but they might be happy to take part in research. And that's a starting point. And we still need to be able for them to have opportunities. And even if they take part one time, maybe sharing their data, they might be more open for another time to take part in a clinical trial. Okay, I'm going to move quickly. So access to information, we have another section on this. One of the main things is around not overstating the risks, but also making sure we communicate the benefits as well of treatment. And I mentioned about dissemination, making sure that study findings are spread widely, and making sure that, from a capacity building, I wanted to say, actually, this is so important, the work you're doing here. We have said something about this. It's the training component is so important, because if we don't have people like you, then we're never going to, close the information gap. So I think I will, just before I wrap up, one of the things we're asking for in this report is that we really need a paradigm shift in our way of thinking, and from, fear and protection. I think Alicia mentioned this earlier on, thinking about security and empowering. So thank you so much. Yeah. And it's lovely to be here. And yeah.
So I hope you are saving your questions for the discussion or for break. But before break, we're going to have one last talk. So there you are. Shuvik, come on up.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Shuvik Mitra. I'm an associate professor at UBC and a clinician scientist here at BC Children's Research Institute. So for all those who are here today, welcome to Vancouver, beautiful and bit rainy, which is unceded, traditional, and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now, I do not have any conflicts to disclose. The reason why I'm here with IMPaCT is because of the fact that I try and do trials in the smallest and the sickest babies. So before we delve into discussion on implications specifically related to neonatal clinical trials, let's take a step back and look at life in a neonatal intensive care unit. For those who haven't been in this vastly different environment, as you walk in, you see a lot of clutter, a lot of equipment, a lot of very busy, skilled people who are trying to save the lives of these very vulnerable, small, sick babies. And then you have the parents, more visible in some units than others, depending on which unit you are in, scared, guilt-ridden. They haven't planned for this throughout their pregnancy, but now they are in the midst of the action. And in the middle of all of this walks in this enthusiastic research coordinator who wants to recruit these small, vulnerable babies into the next big trial. So imagine how that would go. So with this background, I'm hoping that by the end of the talk, we'll be able to describe some of the unique challenges that we face in conducting clinical trials in the NICU, explain a bit of the concept of the pragmatic explanatory continuum as it relates to conducting clinical trials. And I'm hoping that all the experts here, and we have a lot of experts in clinical trials here today, which is great, you can propose some solutions to overcome some of the existing challenges. Because I'm only going to pose questions. I do not have answers to any of these questions. And again, in 20 minutes, it is almost impossible to cover all aspects of issues around clinical trials. So the issues that I miss, I would love for you to bring those up and address that in our panel discussion. Now, before we delve into the details, I should take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous contribution that clinical trials have had in shaping neonatal care as we know today. And we cannot move on without acknowledging the contribution of Dr. Bill Silverman, who in the late 50s and 60s challenged the norm of eminence-based medicine, so to speak, in the ICUs, challenged his own biases on the use of steroids in retinopathy of prematurity, and conducted one of the first clinical trials to essentially prove himself wrong. And that would have been a highly humbling experience for the physician community in that era. Now, moving on, the culture of examining critical questions through randomized clinical trials really took off in the late 70s and 80s through trials on surfactant, PDA management, and so on and so forth. And here again, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge, and it makes me very proud, to kind of acknowledge the contribution of trials led by Canadian researchers on how we practice neonatal medicine today, be it trials on caffeine therapy, trials on indomethacin prophylaxis, trials on oxygen saturation targeting. And the one name that stands out in common across all these trials is Dr. Bob Schmidt, who we have the absolute privilege of having at this meeting 2 days from now. So if you're sticking around, do not miss that talk. But it was her and other researchers in that generation that kind of spurred the interest in the younger generation to try and examine more and more difficult questions in the NICU through randomized clinical trials. And that's why we see this increase in clinical trials over the course of the next 20, 30 years, where we examined a lot of difficult questions. But what we are left with right now is, have we become victims of our own success as we have pushed the boundaries of examining more and more difficult questions? And that kind of leads us to some of the issues that I'm going to highlight in today's talk. Is what are the challenges with contemporary neonatal clinical trials? And I've tried to organize those issues in the IMPaCT format so that we can kind of go back and discuss each of these issues in a more structured fashion. So starting off with the participants. As we push the boundaries of survival and the kind of babies that are thriving today, the participants in clinical trials are becoming more vulnerable than ever before. But have the clinical trial methodologies evolved to adequately incorporate these patients in contemporary clinical trials? Are they even truly represented in the trials that are intended to represent this population? Second, the interventions and the comparisons. Neonatal care is becoming increasingly complex, so are the trial interventions. Are the trial designs appropriate to examine these increasingly complex interventions? And when we talk about simple drug trials, again, we want to spend some time on that. Are we testing the right doses of these drugs in the right population? Second, a topic very, very close to my heart, the outcomes. Are we looking at outcomes that are just easy to measure for us as researchers? Or are we looking at outcomes that are actually important to families and outcomes that align with the research question? And finally, something that we don't talk about often is the timing of outcome assessment. Does it really matter when we assess these outcomes, and how does it impact our decision making? And the overarching issue that underpins all of these facets is the issue of trial design. Are we paying enough attention to figure out whether the intervention is, like, we're designing a trial to explore if the intervention is meaningfully improving the health of an infant when appropriately used in a busy, high-intensity clinical setting? That is more of a pragmatic trial. Or is my trial intended to explore whether the intervention clearly changes the disease process in a specific patient phenotype when administered under strictly controlled conditions. So we would want to kind of spend some time discussing this paradigm and how it relates to contemporary clinical trials and where we kind of get ourselves in a mess. So starting off with the participants, as I said, that the reason why neonatal trials came up in the first place is because of the fact that, well, children are not just small adults and babies are not just small children. So we need to generate information in the specific neonatal population. But now we are pushing our boundaries. And we're pushing our boundaries further as our patients get smaller and smaller and more vulnerable. So the question is that now we have reached a point where are we adequately examining these patients who are the highest risk of morbidity and mortality? Because preterm babies are not just small babies, and extremely preterm babies are not just smaller preterm babies. So I've kind of divided the issues around the challenges in incorporating this specific population in contemporary clinical trials into broadly two headings. One, issues around eligibility, and issues around informed consent. So when we look at eligibility, and when you read a lot of contemporary clinical trials, you see the list of exclusion criteria getting longer and longer and longer. And you wonder that, do you really need to exclude some of these patients just because they've been excluded in other trials? So for example, congenital heart diseases, congenital defects. Some of these patients have nothing to do with the intervention that is being tested. Yet, we just exclude them because it's easy to get through REB. And then we end up with no data on how that intervention interacts with these patients with these complex conditions. Something to think about. Next is dealing with our own biases. Far too often, we see babies not being included because we as physicians feel that, oh, that patient is too sick to participate in this trial. And further, sometimes we even feel that I'm convinced that this interventional control is going to harm this patient, and therefore I want to take this child out of the trial. Now, how do we deal with that? And finally, even if we are convinced about the equipoise, we struggle with a very limited time window in a lot of neonatal trials where we need to recruit babies within minutes, hours, or days after birth. And depending on the resources that you have, sometimes it's very difficult to approach parents and recruit babies in that time window. And that's why we miss out on a lot of these very sick babies in these critical neonatal trials. So we can talk about a lot of different ways how we can address this, and I would love to hear from the experts. But one thing that we can absolutely start off with is incorporating a trial culture in the neonatal unit, where we emphasize and re-emphasize the fact that we do not know what we are doing with these smallest and sickest babies in the first place. Well, the counter argument that I often get is that when you're doing a trial, you still don't know which one is better until you end the trial and analyze results. But at the very least, by participating in a trial, you're reducing the variability. And if you look at the QI literature, even that has shown to improve clinical outcomes. So that's the counter argument. Now let's focus on informed consent. Now, as I said, that in the NICU, the parents are probably in their most emotionally vulnerable state ever. They have very limited cognitive bandwidth. Their cups are full. So that's the reason why we probably get the highest rate of consent refusals, because they cannot just take in anything more in the NICU. And I often wonder that even when we get consent in those very small time windows, how informed is it truly when they are so vulnerable in the NICU? So it is imperative that we start having an honest, true discussion about exploring other forms of consent. because otherwise we cannot move forward, especially with regards to generating evidence in the smallest and sickest babies. So people are already exploring other forms of consent. There's a large feeding trial going on in preterm infants. That's a multi-center trial that is exploring a two-stage consent pathway that includes a preliminary assent followed by a more formal informed consent. But in some cases where we are struggling with a very small time window, some people have looked at the possibility of an antenatal consent. Now, there are pros and cons depending on how you time your consent. In a trial that we are running right now that exclusively enrolls babies born less than 26 weeks of gestation, we have seen that it works slightly better because there is a sense of a bit of control before the baby is born, and therefore there's a bit more time to sit down and talk about the issues around trials. But as this publication from the support trial showed, that it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of resource use and wasted resources, because a lot of the times, depending again on how you time it, a lot of these babies will not be eligible by the time they're born. So you need to keep that in mind if you're considering antenatal consent. But then there are some cases where you cannot predict when your baby will be eligible. Those resuscitation trials right after birth. And that's where it gets really tricky. Now, there's a lot of discussion and debate on deferred consent and waiver of consent and whether it is ethical. And there is arguments that you cannot do a trial without getting an informed consent. But I would like to pose a question to the audience here, that is it not unethical to exclude these very sick patients from neonatal trials and just let them die because of lack of evidence, because we could not get informed consent? So I would really love to hear at the end from the panel on their thoughts on doing trials on these very, very small sick babies. Next, talking about trial interventions. Now, what kind of interventions are we testing in neonatal trials? Are these specific interventions or management approaches? And if we look at the larger trials that have been published in the last few years, you will find that we're exploring more and more of complex management interventions, such as blood transfusion strategies, PDA management strategies, platelet transfusion strategies, feeding strategies, which again brings back the question that are we trying to test the effectiveness of a particular intervention within that broad management strategy, or efficacy of that, or the effectiveness of the strategy itself? And that kind of directly relates to the kind of design and the outcomes that we choose. And when we talk about drugs, there are some specific considerations that we should kind of look at when we think about neonatal drug trials. Because again, in the entire lifespan, this is probably the most dynamic phase where the metabolism and clearance of drugs are changing based on gestation and postnatal age. But if you look at a lot of the contemporary trials, they have used empiric drug dosages. And there's a lot to learn from those trials. If you look at trials of prophylactic indomethacin, more than 19 trials that have been done, almost 4,000 babies enrolled. The most common doses that have been used is the ones that were tested in fetal lambs back in the 1970s. If you look at ibuprofen use in PDA management, the first trial, phase 1 trial that was done in Montreal in mid-1990s, used a dose of 10 milligram per kilogram as a starting dose, followed by 2 doses of 5 and 5 at 24 and 48 hours. 30 years later, the largest trial that was published this year in New England Journal of Medicine used the exact same dosage. So, food for thought. And more so with acetaminophen trials. 12 years back, colleagues in Israel were testing acetaminophen for a completely different indication at a dose of 15 per kilogram, and incidentally found that the PDAs were closing. That led to a slew of 22 randomized trials testing acetaminophen with all different PDA management strategies. And guess what? What didn't change? The empiric dosage. So kind of that raises the question that should we do better? Should every neonatal drug trial have an embedded neonatal pharmacology component? And we have world experts here with us today to kind of shed more light on that. So I'd love to hear from them as we move along in the panel discussion. Then talking about outcomes. Are we choosing the right outcomes? Now, we kind of, in neonatal care, take a lot of pride in promoting ourselves as proponents of family-centered care. But when it comes to choosing the outcomes, well, we haven't done a whole lot until recently, where we are starting to explore what's important to families when it comes to the health of their child. And that kind of leads us to a little bit of a controversial issue, because in recent times, I've listened to talks where there's a lot of trial bashing when trials have not included outcomes that have been highlighted by parents as most important. But I would argue that it depends on what kind of trial you're trying to do. If it's a pragmatic trial, then yes, the outcomes absolutely should directly relate to the outcomes that have been highlighted by families as most important. But if it's an explanatory phase 1 trial, shouldn't the outcomes relate to the disease physiology that is in turn related to the outcomes that matter to families? So again, food for thought. That's where core outcome sets are important. So that's where the core outcome sets are important, and so is bringing in families in the discussion. I'll skip this, which is on trial reporting, which is equally important, where it's not only important what outcomes we select, but also how we report those outcomes. And these publications have shown that we're not doing a good job at that. And finally, the timing. We've seen a lot of trials where we find that the trials have shown a change in family important outcome short term, but in the longer term, there's no difference. So do we say that the intervention is ineffective, or there's a possibility of post-randomization confounding? And just to give a brief example, we do a trial intervention at time 0. We find some difference at the first time point, and then we have a bunch of co-interventions that are done over the course of time, and at 5 years, we find no difference. So do we say that the intervention didn't work, or we just ignore all the good work that our colleagues have done? So that's something that we need to consider, and what kind of co-interventions are allowed in trials, which brings us back to the pragmatic explanatory continuum. In summary, what I would like to highlight today is that neonatal trials are becoming increasingly complex, both in terms of the population and also in terms of the protocols. And therefore, it is imperative that we explore and encourage alternative consenting strategies. We should clearly define what we are doing and design the trials accordingly. And hopefully we can have some time in the panel discussion on the PRACY tool and how that could help in kind of deciding on the pragmatic explanatory approach. But regardless of what we do, I think it's imperative that we actively involve parents early on in the trial design process, so we have a shared understanding on the trial question, design, and the outcomes. Thank you.